This year's class of NFL free agents isn't the strongest at some of the Bears' biggest positions of need. But fortunately, some of the teams in some salary cap trouble may end up cutting some pretty good players that the Bears could get for a bargain.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. On the show today, we look at some of the potential salary cap casualties from other teams that could end up adding to this free agent class that could be of some real interest to the Chicago Bears. We'll look at some prominent wide receivers that might be better than some of the other options you have in free agency right now. You'll look at some offensive linemen that certainly bring some red flags, but offer you some additional options beyond what's out there at the moment. And then we'll turn our attention to some prominent defensive players that could fill some big needs for the Bears, including a couple of prominent former Chicago Bears that could hit the market once again, and maybe, just maybe, a reunion is in order for a brand new regime that wasn't involved with them previously. I want to start with the wide receivers, though, because that's where this free agent class might be the weakest among big Bears needs. You look at the guys that could be available. It's Jakobi Meyers from the Patriots is kind of the top name there. Juju Smith-Schuster from the Kansas City Chiefs. It's not really guys, Alan Lazard from the Packers. Not any guys that are like true number ones, and a lot of guys that are more in that number 2/number 3 range. That's not to say that another team is going to make a cap casualty of a true number 1 wide receiver, but it's nice to have some additional options to choose from to create more supply to lower the demand, and hopefully the price then becomes a little bit easier for the Chicago Bears. It's important to keep in mind here that when we talk about players that are cap casualties, guys that other teams would cut just to save the money on the salary cap and let them hit the open market, that tends to be older players. It tends to be players that haven't been playing as well lately, players that tend to be past their prime. Typically, if there's a player whose salary cap is a problem and it's a young player who's playing well, you'll see them work out some sort of contract restructure or contract extension to move the numbers around. But they become a cap casualty when their current team no longer really wants them or doesn't feel like it's worth restructuring, renegotiating that contract to try and make that work more in the long term. So all of these guys are going to have some levels of red flags, but I think the one that Bears fans get the most excited about from a name standpoint is Keenan Allen with the Los Angeles Chargers. I was about to say San Diego. Still can't quite get through there. He only played 10 games this past season, still had, 750 receiving yards. It still was a great threat for Justin Herbert and the Chargers, and he's been a 1,000-yard guy every year for the last 5 years before that. He's still a very good wide receiver, and he's about to be 31, so he's on the older side, but he's not as old as DeAndre Hopkins in that way, or even Devontae Adams, some of the other receivers we talk about in the offseason. It seems like a guy that Los Angeles may want to find a way to try and keep around, but his name is one of those that just keeps getting floated out there as a guy that they might just say, you know what, it's been a good run, but we're just not going to do it anymore and move on. He's a great route runner, a guy who just has a knack for getting open, and I think he would be a great target for Justin Fields. Maybe he's not like the mold of the true number 1, but I do think he would be better than right now than either Darnell Mooney or Chase Claypool based on what we've seen in Chicago so far, and I think would be a great pair to add to them and to give Justin Fields a weapon. That I like him better at this point than Jakobi Meyers, although Meyers is younger, but I wonder if Allen's price tag might not be easier to work through at this stage of the process. And he's still, I think, a big-time exciting name that Bears fans could really get behind. Another guy who would be a little bit younger, but just as a result of the depth they have on his team, is Tyler Boyd from the Cincinnati Bengals. He's 28, so, 3 years difference there. Not as consistent of a 1,000-yard guy every year, but has had some 1,000-yard seasons and hasn't been below 750 yards in a while. Has stayed healthy. Is able to be. It was kind of their number 3 and inflated perhaps by having Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in that roster. But 6'2", 203, he's got the size. He can work downfield pretty well. There's a lot to like about Boyd. Just has a big contract, and if you're the Bengals and T. Higgins is coming up and needs to be a free agent, you keep one or the other, and I think they would prefer to keep Higgins, who's younger and even a little bit better. So I think Boyd is another name that would be easy to get behind if the Bengals do indeed make him available. Then it starts to get a little bit more, guys that used to be bigger names that aren't as much anymore. Michael Thomas from the New Orleans Saints is one of the more expensive wide receivers in football, gets criticized as being a guy who only runs slant routes, and that's more scheme than just like his skill set, because we've seen him be a dynamic player, but he's on the older side of the spectrum as far as wide receivers go, and is not going to be, a long-term piece for a team like the Chicago Bears, but he's not like old either, as I'm double checking. He's about to turn 30 this offseason, so he's not far from the same range, but has been hurt a lot lately. He missed all of 2021, only played 3 games this season, only played 7 games in 2020, so it's been 3 full seasons since he's played a full year or played more than 7 games in a season. It's definitely taking a flyer on a guy who's been a 1,700-yard receiver before, who's had 150 catches in a season before, who has that number 1 skill set. It's just been a while. And that's why the Saints would cut him. That's why the Bears might be in a position to take that risk and to say, sure, we've got some other receivers here. There's a lot of upside there. Let's see if we can stabilize some things with him potentially in Chicago. 2 other names I'll throw in here: Robert Woods from the Tennessee Titans, Corey Davis from the New York Jets. Both guys who've kind of trailed off a little bit, no longer really in their heydays, but still veteran, consistent wide receivers in an offseason where the Bears don't have too many intriguing options. Both of those guys have the pedigree and the performance, and again, are not like 35, 36, 37-year-old receivers, more in that 30, 31 range. You can still get 1 or 2 or maybe 3 good years out of them, and you don't feel like you're going to have to commit a long-term contract to them because they are salary cap casualties from their previous team. And all salary cap casualties don't count towards the compensatory pick formula, which probably isn't a factor for the Bears this offseason anyway, but it's a caveat to throw in there as well for a team like Chicago. So maybe adding some more at the wide receiver class could help give you some better options there. There's also some opportunities on the offensive line here to add a veteran to this group in a free agent class that's good, but not like stacked. Very good draft class after that as well. But we'll go through some guys here with some upside and some question marks as well next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. They quickly help you attract qualified candidates to your open job with their targeting tools that go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post, company, and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of only the most qualified candidates. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to then screen and rate applicants based on your job qualifications, all in one platform. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number 1 in delivering quality candidates compared to their leading competitors. Join LinkedIn Jobs to help find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Trying to find cap casualty offensive linemen is tough because every team needs more offensive linemen. There is a shortage of quality offensive linemen. But when you look at like the free agent class of linemen, you wonder how many of those guys are actually going to hit the market. Will the Chiefs truly let Orlando Brown get out there? Will the 49ers let Mike McGlinchey become that free agent at the tackle position? And so you see other teams are out there, like particularly I start with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as one of these both cash-strapped team that kind of went in all around Tom Brady, and now also you don't have Tom Brady. So a team that they're not exactly blowing it up. From the people I talked to down in Tampa, they're not going to like get rid of any of their youngest guys that they really like, but there are guys on the fringe that they might be more willing to part ways with. Like they're not going to get rid of Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, for example, but on their offensive line, there's some talk that their left tackle Donovan Smith could become a salary cap casualty because they have, Tristan Wirfs on that offensive line. They've got some other players up front that they do really like. And also the guard Shaq Mason, who they had traded for from the New England Patriots. Both guys are particularly expensive. I don't think they would necessarily release both of them, but maybe you choose one, pick your poison on what you feel like, who is easier to replace, who would you rather make sure you have here long term, because they've got young guys at both positions. But pick one and, clear some salary cap space there and hope that, you're able to replace one the other way, and maybe it gives the Bears another option to add to their offensive line. Because like Donovan Smith has been a really steady left tackle starter for them for like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. He had some injuries this year, but otherwise had been pretty consistently healthy. He's 29, will turn 30 over the summer. So he's not young, but he's not old. A lot of these guys fall in that range. Like they're right in that middle range because they got these big contracts when they were younger, and now they're getting older and not as good. And the older players don't get as big of these contracts to then become cap casualties. So that a lot of these players kind of fall into this sweet spot range. And Donovan Smith is just kind of a what you're going to get with a guy like that. Shaq Mason is about the same age, 29, turns 30 in August, was a really solid starter for the New England Patriots for 7 or 8 years, and then came to Tampa this year and played really, really well. But it's not like they have the organizational allegiance to him in that way. I mean, the Patriots drafted him in the 4th round, and then, of course, they were pretty quick to trade him to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I remember when they traded him, it felt like it was a really good deal for Tampa because I don't remember it being a significant draft pick, and I'm trying to pull it up because I can't remember the pick off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure it was like a 4th round pick or some kind of day 3 draft pick, and it's not, the answer is not coming immediately to me. 5th round, it was a 5th round pick in last year's draft, which is great value for a guy who was a 17-game starter at, I believe, right guard for them and played really, really well. But, he's also getting a lot of money. That's part of why the Patriots traded him, is because, he's a quality starting right guard, but is he worth top dollar at guard? Is he playing like a top dollar guard? Maybe not. Buccaneers were willing to pay for that to try and give Tom Brady better protection. Didn't work out super well for them in the long run, as far as like they weren't able to give Brady the protection, but it was still good value in the trade. But maybe now they're not willing to keep paying that money while they go through somewhat of a rebuild or somewhat of a turnover or somewhat of a change in organizational focus and direction, and say, you know what, we can't invest that much in a guard. We're going to let you go younger at that position, go cheaper, and kind of keep building this roster that way. Feels to me like maybe one of the two of them would be available, and that the Bears should be interested if somebody like that became available, especially if some of the other guys in this free agent class maybe start to dry up just a little bit more, because there is talent here. And I wanted to be sure to sort of like compare here to what we're working with. It's Orlando Brown and Mike McGlinchey are kind of the two big tackles. And then, you got like Juwan Taylor, Caleb McGarry, and guys that you don't get as fired up about. And there's some guards to like, Ben Powers and Isaac Seumalo from, I think, with the Eagles, I believe, or Nate Davis. But it's not like a stacked class where you're really like, oh yeah, we're going to get a bunch of Pro Bowl players, especially if guys like Brown and McGlinchey end up going back to their respective teams. So guys like Smith or Mason, if they become available, could be better options for the Bears. Another New Orleans Saint to look at here, given their massive, massive salary cap issues, is one that'll bring some red flags of his own, but Andrews Pete is a former first-round pick out of Stanford back in 2015. I remember talking about him a lot in that draft class. Had played tackle in college, but kicked inside to guard for them. Has been a pretty good guard, made the Pro Bowl 3 years in a row, 2018, 2019, and 2020, but has not ever played a full 16-game season in his career, and it's been 8 seasons now. Played 11 this past year with injuries, 6 the year before that, 13 the year before that, 10 the year before that. So, like, he's made the Pro Bowl despite having some of these injured seasons, but it's not somebody that the Saints have really fully gotten their full investment out of, and it's another situation where they don't have to cut him necessarily, but do they want to keep paying pretty high price left guard money to a left guard that they haven't been able to consistently rely on to be there for all 16 games. The same red flags would follow him to Chicago, but the idea would be that if he's a cap casualty, he will then come to the Bears at presumably a much more affordable price once he hits that free agent market. And then, you can have other options there where you say, Pete's our guy. Say you cut Cody Whitehair or whatever, and you replace him with Andrews Pete. Then you can still have, if Lucas Patrick becomes a backup guard and you get a new center, you can still have an option there. Or if you really like, Jatir Carter or some of the other guys, the Bears have been rotating around these guard positions. Or, if you want to kick some, like Larry Borum played some left guard last season, you could still have guys you like behind him in case of that injury, but also feel like he could be a more affordable option. And when he is healthy and on the field, he's actually pretty darn good. So it's not a question of how good he is. It's just how often you're actually going to have him on the field for you. And one other veteran name I want to throw out there at the tackle position who has, I think he himself has come out and publicly said on a podcast that he expects to be released by his team is Taylor Lewan from the Tennessee Titans, former first-round pick out of Michigan. He's been in the league a good 10 seasons or so now. He's 31. He's going to be that veteran, kind of like Riley Reif, but he's been also a Pro Bowl guy in the past, but injured this past season, missed a couple of games the year before, and then injured the previous year. So the last 3 years he's played, 19, 20 games in the last 3 seasons. But we're talking about a cap casualty veteran that could come in and just be that stabilizing force at one of your tackle positions, whether you want to put him at the left side or the right side to kind of do 2 birds with 1 stone there. Really kind of give you that veteran presence that I think has a little more upside than a guy like Riley Reif, who's kind of always just been more of the, he's average, he's reliable, but he's average, but he's never been a Pro Bowl tackle the way that Taylor Lewan has been multiple times and in consecutive years earlier in his career. So it's not a glamorous cap casualty group of offensive linemen, but it's not a glamorous free agent group of offensive linemen. And ultimately, this needs to be a high priority for the Bears to make sure they're giving Justin Fields as optimum of pass protection as possible. I think in free agency, you're going to see a lot of the money go on the defensive side of the ball in particular, where there's some big needs at a lot of open positions. And there's a couple of names that could be cap casualties that keep getting floated out there that I think you can get excited about, especially at the edge rusher position, including a couple of former Chicago Bears. We'll talk about who could become available and why this could be the place to find that Bears free agent compared to like the actual guys who are already slated to be free agents who, of course, might not even ultimately make that free agent market. That's next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our new partners at FanDuel. This year, the only app that you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're really excited to have them as our sports betting partner because it's going to make Super Bowl 57 that much more fun for me. I've already got some money down on some player props. I like the long shot odds on Hassan Riddick as a potential dark horse Super Bowl MVP if he could get some big sacks against this Chiefs offensive line. But they've got everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown and so many more props. So download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Their app is safe, secure, super easy to use, and best of all, you can get your winnings paid to you instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your first no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The Bears really might be able to get more out of this free agent edge rusher class with some salary cap casualties coming from a few other teams. And the headliner here that I think you can get excited about pretty easily is Khalil Mack. A year after the Chicago Bears trade him to the Los Angeles Chargers for a second-round pick, there's talk that they might not want to keep paying the salary that they were paying him and could opt to release him and just make him a free agent because you can keep trying to restructure that contract and keep trying to push more money in the future, but eventually you just got to pay. And he's 32 later this month, so he's not going to be a long-term piece for the Chargers, and he's not going to be a long-term piece for the Chicago Bears if he became available and they were able to sign him. But there's something fun about A, the reunion, and B, he can also just fill a need for a year or two. He doesn't need to be a 5-year piece here in free agency. Bring him back, let him be productive, help you win some games in the short term, draft somebody to be that long-term replacement. But in the meantime, he's still Khalil Mack kicking butt and back in Chicago, really where it feels like he kind of belongs in his career. I really feel like the Bears have kind of taken ownership over Mack away from the Raiders, even though he was kind of always loved the Raiders first and foremost. I don't know, there's just something that would be really fun to see him come back in a Chicago uniform. The other former Bear that's been floated out here is Leonard Floyd. I don't know if Leonard Floyd is as good of a scheme fit. He's more of that sort of long, slim edge rusher, stand up in the 3-4 edge rusher type role as opposed to hand in the dirt 4-3 defensive end. But at the same time, we've seen him be able to play well against the run. He doesn't need to be the world's largest defensive end. And he's had 3 straight seasons of 9 or more sacks, all in Los Angeles, benefiting perhaps a lot from Aaron Donald. And I'm not necessarily advocating for giving him a big contract, but they're also in some salary cap trouble over there in Los Angeles and feeling like, do they want to keep paying him and Aaron Donald and all the other bills they have to pay? Because, Leonard Floyd still feels like he's a young guy, but he's 30 and he'll turn 31 in September. Like, he has been in the league for quite some time now, and maybe he's not a long-term piece for them. And similar to Mack, maybe he's not a long-term piece for the Bears, but plug and play for a couple of seasons, see what you can get out of him, and keep kind of moving forward. Some other edge rusher names, not former Bears, that I really think would be worth kicking some tires on: Bud Dupree with the Tennessee Titans, Shaq Barrett with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Romeo Okwara from the Detroit Lions, had some real down production this year, but I still think there's something in the tank there. And maybe, just maybe, this name has been floated out seemingly every offseason as a potential salary cap cut, and then the team never does, and the team keeps restructuring him and keeps having some pretty decent success with him and doesn't seem to be in like a major hurry to get rid of him, given how much they had to give up to trade for him. But Frank Clark with the Kansas City Chiefs, right? So ever since he came to KC, he was a 3-time Pro Bowler, hasn't hit that double-digit sack mark, but it's just been, a steady, aggressive, violent pass rusher on the edge for them. He's now he turns 30 in June, so we're talking about this same kind of range, but you can still get 2 to 3 decent years out of him, and we've seen him play really well in these big moments in the playoffs, some real experience that he can bring to this defensive line, and I think he could translate pretty well scheme-wise into this, 4-3 defensive end role pretty well and give this Bears defense that veteran presence that we keep talking about on the edge. I think the same is true for Shaq Barrett. Bud Dupree carries some concerns a little bit more for me, a little bit lower end, he and Romeo Okwara, but man, it's not a strong edge rusher class. It's Marcus Davenport is a good young ascending player from the Saints who they may not be able to re-sign and afford. I mean, Clowney is out there, but he's kind of a mercenary at this stage of his career. And then it's Charles Omenihu, Arden Key, and then a bunch of older type of guys like Giannis Ngakoue and Brandon Graham, Melvin Ingram, Justin Houston. It's not a great edge rusher class, and it feels to me like the Bears could use at least, one for sure, if not even 2 new big time edge rushers to add to this group. And so if guys like Mack or Floyd or Clark or Barrett or Okwara or whoever end up becoming available, that sweetens the pot quite a bit to be able to get one of those guys in the mix. I'll throw in 2 other defensive players real quick, off-ball linebackers that have been floated out there that their teams could potentially move on from, with the Bears having Nick Morrow as a free agent. Sanborn's your only go-to guy under contract at linebacker right now, and you could kind of upgrade there. Eric Kendricks from the Vikings is definitely on the older side, but as they bring in, a guy like Brian Flores, do they want him to be in that cover zero pass rushing, blitzing kind of linebacker role at this age and that price tag, or do they try and move on from him? I think he could be a fit for what the Bears want to do defensively. The one that might get me more excited, though, if he becomes available, which he's still a really good player, but just really expensive for the team, Shaq Thompson of the Carolina Panthers. Talk about another one of these super athletic speed linebackers that the Bears seem to really like with Roquan and Nick Morrow. Thompson is, 28, soon to be 29 in April. Hasn't had major injury issues, seems to generally be a pretty consistent tackling machine. It just seems like it's a lot for Carolina to have invested in a few of those positions as they go into more of this rebuilding mode as well. And if he became available, whether it's even as a potential trade or as a cut there, I'd be hard-pressed to not kick the tires at a guy like Shaq Thompson and add even more of that speed to the Bears linebacker core that I think would be a massive upgrade over the likes of Nicholas Morrow at this stage of their career. So it's a lot to like here. I really feel like 1 or 2 really good players, or at least a handful of intriguing players will become available by their team releasing them and not wanting to pay their salary cap cost. And I think that's a great opportunity for the Bears to get players that could be cheaper and players that, add to a free agent class that might be lacking in some of the areas that the Bears particularly need. Would love to know which salary cap casualties you want to see become available and become Chicago Bears. Let us know in the comments on the Locked On Bears YouTube video. Tweet us at Locked On Bears. Post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group as well for more of that Bears talk. Make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to Locked On Bears. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, check out all of our Locked On Chicago sports podcasts here on Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. That includes your Bulls, your Blackhawks, your Cubs, your White Sox, your Fighting Illini, and your Northwestern Wildcats as well. There might be other college shows, but we got not only Chicago sports, but across the sports landscape. Check out some of our other Locked On Podcast Network shows for your favorite teams. And of course, you got to come back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.